This model is going to show you exactly why our speaking center is so effective and why it is actually more effective than learning with a fixed group. Do you know how to pronounce this word? Do you think your customers know how to pronounce this word? They may say something like Isley or Aisley. Well, that's actually not true. I'm going to show you how you're going to learn this word with our speaking center. You would see a picture and you would hear a voice. The picture would be of an airplane and you would see a flight attendant pushing a wagon. And maybe there's somebody standing in her way. And she would say, excuse me, sir. You're standing in the aisle. Can you please clear the aisle so I can push my wagon through? A few minutes later, she comes back, same man standing in the same spot. So she says, sir, you're still standing in the aisle. Can you please clear the aisle? Let me ask you a question. Do you have a window seat or an aisle seat? Well, do you know how to pronounce that word now? Do you know what it means? Well, this is how you're going to learn it with our speaking center. It's the same way you learned your native language. Step 1, you listen. You hear the word and you combine it with the object. You see the picture, so you know exactly what this word means. Step 2, you must speak back. The computer asks you to speak this word back. Now you're learning to speak this word, same as your native language. You listened first, then you spoke. Later on in the exercises, you would see the words, and then you would see this word for the first time. So now you know how to read this word, what the word actually looks like. Final step, you get home, you work in the book, and then you have to write a little bit, and then you write this word. So you have done everything the way you learned your native language. First you listened, then you spoke, then you read, and then you had to write. English is different than some of the other languages. There were a lot of influences from France and from the Vikings, and so a lot of words are pronounced much differently than they are written. This is not the only example. There are many examples in the English language. Words like salmon, silhouette, they're all pronounced quite differently than they are written. But if you learn the language the way we do in the speaking center, it won't matter. You will connect the sound with the actual object or with the actual term, and then you'll have no problem later on when you see the word written afterwards connecting the two. This is one of the most effective ways to tell our customers why our speaking center is indeed so effective.
Many customers, especially those on lower levels, feel that they need a translation in order to understand what's happening or in order to learn the language. Now we know that's not the case, but we need some way of explaining it that really helps the customer understand. And this is a simple model. Simply draw this square which compares English to the native language. And then use an example like this. Here we have Farid. Let's say Farid is a Spanish native speaker. Now, I'm going to ask him a question. So Farid, what's the time? So now he's heard my question. He's trying to translate it so that he can understand. He's got it. Now, of course, he thinks of the answer in Spanish. That's pretty easy. And now he's got to get it back into English.
It's 2:45 p.m.
Thank you very much. We got there. He told me the time. But you see what happened. He travelled 3 sides of a square. It was slow. You want to ever speak fluently like that? It's clear that if you have to do these 3 sides, you will never be spontaneous in the English language. And that's why the Wall Street Institute method does not translate. There's no translation in the books. Everything is in English. Even in the classes, from Survival 1, it's all in English. Why? Because from the start, like in your native language, you should learn by association. You should hear English, and you should think in English, and you should answer in English. Only this way can you actually really speak the language fluently. And this is a simple example to show customers why that is. Okay, this is one for real language experts. Teachers learn this when they're in training. It actually forms the core of TEFL teaching. What we're talking about are 3 P's. Essentially, the P's represent the way that time is spent in a class. The first P is present. This is where the teacher presents new information to the students and the students listen. The second P is practice. This is where the teacher now gets the students to use the new knowledge in exercises, so they're repeating and so on. And the final P is produce. This is where we're not doing rigid exercises anymore. This is where the students are actually speaking more freely, but using the new knowledge as they're working with their own vocabulary and grammar. And the ratios you see here, that's the way it's supposed to be in the classroom. Not much presenting, more practice, and even more production. It's important that the students actually get to use the language. Is that the way it is at school? No. In fact, it's exactly the other way around. The teacher spends too much time talking, and the students don't get enough practice. They do not get enough time to produce the language. No wonder that people who took part at school in English courses or had fixed group English courses with other language institutes cannot speak. This is the reason. The Wall Street method does it the other way around. Using the Speaking Center, we already have the students practicing as they are learning. Presentation is in the Speaking Center when you listen to an audio. It doesn't have to happen so much in the class. So with our blended learning method, we basically allow the student more time to practice and produce, and that's what's important. That forms the core of our acquisition cycle. We use these ratios the way they should be used. So now I'm going to present a model which demonstrates why fixed group learning cannot be as effective, whether this is at school as a child or in a private language institute comparable to ours. Fixed groups simply cannot optimize the progress for each person. So let's look at this simple model. In my group, there are 12 students. You see them here. We have some students in the middle who can learn at an average pace. They have average powers of comprehension. The students above are fast learners. They want the group to go quicker. And the students below are the slower learners who need more time. This is typical in a fixed group. So what can the teacher do? The teacher has to orient themselves on the average, or maybe even the slightly below average. What does this mean? The students who want to learn quicker are going to get bored. They're going to get frustrated. The students who would learn slower are going to get frustrated as well. They want the teacher to slow down. In the end, the only people who are happy are the average learners, or those at the pace of the teacher. Inevitably, we're going to demotivate some of the students. And this actually gets worse over time. As the group progresses week by week, the people who are fast learners are going to get more and more bored, more and more frustrated. They want to go faster and faster. Those on a lower power of comprehension are going to actually get more and more overwhelmed. It's going too fast. At school, children have no choice. They have to stay in the group, and that's why the results from school are not so good. In other language institutes, what tends to happen is the people who are either bored or overwhelmed drop out. They waste their money. This is a great example of what happens in fixed groups. We call it the group dynamic model. And it cannot happen at Wall Street Institute because everybody learns at their own pace.
Now this is a great example for somebody who says, I think I need a teacher to learn. Well, let's imagine that this large jug of water is the teacher, and the water is the knowledge that the teacher has, the English knowledge. These 3 glasses we have are students in a classroom. So if you imagine that all the teacher needs to do is talk to the students, and he'll naturally pass his information from himself to the student. And one after another, we fill the glasses of the students, and they all get better in English. Does that really make sense? Is that really how you learn a language? Well, let me give you an analogy. Let's say I invite my favorite tennis player, Roger Federer, and I asked him to talk to you for 1 hour about how to hit better serves at Wimbledon. So Roger Federer is going to come in here, and he's going to speak to you for 1 hour. He's going to give you all his tricks. You're not going to practice at all. You're just going to be listening to him. And he's going to tell you what he does to be a better player and to hit better serves. Now, after 1 hour with Roger Federer, Do you think the next time you step out on a tennis court, you're going to be able to serve better? Just because of what Roger Federer talked to you for 1 hour? If it makes sense in tennis that you need some time to practice, why does it make sense in English? In tennis, we know you need to get out there and serve yourself. You need to slowly get better, and then maybe next time you're out on the tennis court, you'll have a better chance. Why don't we think the same in English? In English, we know a teacher is important, but it's equally important to practice yourself. And if it makes sense in tennis, maybe it should make sense in English as well. So Lex, what do you think 412 means?
Well, at first sight, it actually looks like the score in an England versus USA soccer match. 12 to England, 4 to the USA. Although 4 is a lot for the USA.
You really think you're funny, don't you? You may be funny, but you're wrong. Actually, this is from a study. A study about how long it takes human beings to learn something that they don't forget it anymore. Children learn things faster. They only need to repeat things 4 times. Us adults, it takes a little bit longer. We need to repeat something 12 times until we remember it. So what does that actually mean? Well, let's take a classroom format. The way a class should actually look like is this. The teacher would walk in and would say, "The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain." And now every student would have to repeat it 12 times. What a terrible waste of time. Have you ever seen a class where every student actually repeats something 12 times? Of course not. Nobody has the time for that. So how do we do this at Wall Street? Well, we use the speaking center and the book to prepare people to repeat things before they have to come to the class. So when they come to the teacher, they're already prepared. They've already repeated everything 12 times, and they don't need to repeat anymore in the class. So what can the teacher do? The teacher can focus more on interaction, more on speaking, and more on personalized feedback. So for customers who think that you need to have a teacher, this 412 example may convince them otherwise.
Now, I'd like to use a really simple example to show you how the human brain works. You know, some customers come in expecting the impossible. They want to learn the whole English language within 2 weeks. They want to fly to England and become fluent within 2 weeks. Now we know that this is not possible, but how can we make that clear to the customer? Let's use a simple example. Look at this plant. What does a plant need to stay alive? Water. That's right. And there are 2 ways of looking after a plant. There's a way that I tend to prefer, which is leave it alone for a few weeks. Then realize, oh, it's not looking so good, and throw a bucket of water over it. What happens? The water goes through the plant all over the floor. The plant cannot absorb that amount of water in such a short time. Sound familiar? Can you use that with learning English? The brain is the same. You try to bombard your brain with too much English in too short a time, only a small amount will stay in there. What's important is the same as for this plant. Regular practice. A plant will stay alive if you give it regular water over a longer period of time. And the human brain is the same when learning English. Practice regularly. That's how you can guarantee success and improve your English on a long-term basis.
Active knowledge, passive knowledge. This model is good for 2 explanations. Firstly, how often do your customers come to you and say, "Oh, I understand so much better than I speak"? Well, must happen all the time. Now you can use this model to explain that phenomenon and look like a language expert. As a matter of fact, even native speakers normally can understand better than they speak. Let me give you an example. English. English has well over 1 million words. Do we know them all? Of course not. Passively, this means words we understand when we hear or see them, we know about 30 to 50,000. Sounds like a lot, right? Well, how many do we actually use when we speak? Much less. Somewhere between 5 and 8,000. So even a native speaker can understand better than he speaks. Well, How do most people judge their own English knowledge? They judge it actively, how well they speak. So they don't actually judge it by their passive knowledge. And passive knowledge is actually how good you are at the language. And this is how Wall Street tests the English of our customers. Our entrance test tests the passive knowledge, actually the knowledge that you have in the language, the grammar, and the vocabulary. There's another way you can use this model. When you want to do a language course abroad, what actually improves the most? Well, can you really absorb that much information in a 2-week time frame? Normally not. But what happens? You use the language a lot, so your active knowledge actually improves and increases. So you feel like you're speaking a lot better. But are you really? Have you really improved your passive knowledge? In 2 weeks, probably not much. As soon as you return from the language course, what happens? You stop using that language regularly, and the active knowledge shrinks. And now you're back where you were when you started. For those customers who think that a language course is going to solve their problem, this model might show them otherwise. Only long-term constant learning, the way Wall Street does it, will reach their long-term goal.
Finally, we're going to look at a model which explains why it is the sum of the parts of a blended learning method which lead to success. I'm going to draw an analogy between a professional musician and blended learning. Think of a professional musician, a violin player, who is in the London Philharmonic Orchestra. Must be a very good violin player. What does this person live for? What is the highlight of their day? Of course, it's the concert. At 8 p.m, the curtain goes up, and the violin player has the chance to show the world what he or she can do. The conductor is present, of course, but the conductor is just guiding the orchestra through. It's the musician who is showing what he or she can do. Is that all a professional musician needs to do? Of course not. Every day there is orchestra practice. A couple of hours the orchestra meets to practice particularly difficult passages, and the conductor helps them through it, speaking to individuals or groups of musicians. Maybe they practice new pieces for the future. This is essential. Is that all a professional musician has to do? 8 o'clock and 2 hours in the afternoon? No. They have to keep working on their abilities. They have to practice. A professional musician practices for about 4 hours a day. Do they need the conductor to do this? No. What they actually have is a tutor, somebody who helps them hone their skills. This is what makes a professional musician. You cannot just turn up at 8 p.m. You have to go to orchestra practice, and you have to practice alone. You see the analogy? This is very similar to our method. The complementary class and social club is where the student has the ability to show what they can do. The student is the one speaking, the student is the one participating most, and the teacher is there to guide and support and help, like the conductor. The encounter is where the teacher plays a more active role and helps the student improve. And the speaking center is where the student practices for themselves to get ready for the big event. So you see, this is a good analogy. You could also use a professional football player if you have a customer like Jeff who's into football. It's a great way of helping somebody understand the advantages of blended learning and the importance of blended learning. I hope you've enjoyed looking at all of these models, and I hope that a lot of them will be useful to you when dealing with customers who are not quite sure about this method yet. Remember, don't use all of these in one appointment. Keep it short and simple. Just use the models that fit to the needs or the doubts of your customer. Have fun with them.